go. It's You're All Doomed, the podcast that shaves its way through Friday the 13th, the final chapter, in 13-minute chunks. I'm scampering masked maniac Greg.
I'm Brian.
And this minute begins with Jason having bashed through the window and clutching Tommy while getting smacked in the head with a hammer. And for all intents and purposes ends with the closing Paramount logo. So, as we pick up from the last episode, Jason has smashed through the Jarvis family house window, has Tommy in his clutches, but older sister Trish is smacking Jason in the head with a hammer, and then gouges him in the back of the neck with the claw end. This causes him to release his grip on Tommy. So Tommy and Trish begin running upstairs desperately, but Jason bashes through the front door and fucking Mjolnirs the hammer at Trish like he's the mighty Thor. If his aim had been a little bit better, that would have been the best kill in the entire series.
It was pretty sweet.
There's even a great shot of Tommy being shocked and awed by Jason's onslaught here. Oh, it's magnificent.
The shot that Trish gets in Jason's neck it feels like it's pretty much the same spot that Ginny nails him in.
Oh,
and so it's probably really tender.
Yeah, like his Achilles neck.
Yeah,
almost.
like especially
good
sensitive,
point.
And so the poor guy keeps getting hit there.
But no matter how you slice it, Jason is an absolute juggernaut now. He's at the peak of his powers, and nothing is going to stand in his way.
After narrowly missing the hammer throw, Trish and Tommy run upstairs and they hide in Tommy's room. And Jason's close behind, so Trish and Tommy barricade themselves in the room by pushing a bookcase in front of the door. And they sit there and they wait and they wait and they wait, and nothing happens. And what I love here is Jason politely tries the door handle a few times. Like he's already busted through a door, but now he's just like, well, let me try the handle, let me save the trouble here. And so he kind of wiggles the handle and nothing happens. And then he decides that he's done toying with them, and then he just breaks the door down with an axe.
Yeah, he goes to town on the door. And they're kind of at a loss because they're now trapped. But Trish has the bright idea of grabbing Tommy's computer monitor, which is an old cathode ray tube monitor, and smashes Jason on the head with it, so that can go on the damage report. He's now been bashed in the head by an old television, basically.
I like this one too because there's like sparks flying all over the place when he gets bashed over the head. So
yeah, it's great. It lays him flat, so they're able to get out of the room, and they get separated. Tommy is still back by the door where and Jason is between he and Trish. So Jason revives and then has this really great shot of Jason looking back and forth, trying to decide which person he's going to go after. It's super spooky. It's brightly lit, so you can see everything that's going on. And Jason he it's like a little kid at a buffet. He can go either direction.
Yeah, I think he decides to go with Trish because he doesn't want to hear about Tommy's mask collection. And so he's like the lesser of two evils. I'm just going to go with Trish here.
Yeah, she kind of bolts down the stairs, which prompts Jason to follow hot on her heels. And,
he's running.
He's flat out running like a maniac. It's awesome. It's really scary. There's a shot of her charging out the front door with Jason right behind her. That is kind of, if I have bad dreams about being chased, that's kind of what I picture. It's super terrifying. We've been back and forth between the Jarvis house and the party house an awful lot, and that continues here. Mm-hmm. She goes back to the party house, runs all the way upstairs, and then, inspired by the family dog, she goes out the window.
None of this makes sense. Like they're not following any kind of pattern of logic. The last time they ran into the house, they went in the basement. And this time she runs into the house and then she goes upstairs. And then as soon as she gets upstairs, she runs out the window. I can kind of understand the idea of running upstairs, getting Jason to follow you upstairs, and then jumping out the window thinking that Jason isn't crazy enough to follow you. So you're slowing him down by him turning around and having to go back downstairs and run out the front door. So you gain a little bit of an advantage there, but it's still not something that would jump into my mind, like, yes, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to jump out the window.
Well,
That's what's going to do it.
And you've seen this guy bash through a door and take a hammer to the neck. What makes you think he's not going to go through the window to follow you?
That's true.
It's a gamble. I mean, she's desperate. It feels a little bit like this is where the limitations of the budget and the set are dictating the story. Like they only have 2 structures to play with, so they're running back and forth between the 2. And okay, let's send her back to the party house and have her go through the window. Sure, but it's fine. I mean, it's entertaining, and I really like the stunt. I think it's great.
Yeah, me too.
It's very clear that the stunt performer is wearing no pads, so it's nicely executed, and doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the character, but I dig how they managed to pull it off.
Yeah, she kind of bounces off like a small like ledge or like roof off the window or outside the window, and then she bounces off of that onto the ground, and you can kind of tell that there's a mat on the ground covered with dirt and leaves because she kind of bounces when she hits the ground, but it's still it's kind of basically one shot, and so you can see that there's no cutaway and that someone is really just doing this jump, and there's no cables or anything, so it is really cool.
Yeah. Jason then peers out the window and sees her laying, prone on the ground below, and it's not really clear whether he's meant to assume that she's dead or if he's like, oh shit, now I gotta go all the way back downstairs and check. But it does slow him down.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. He's probably looking out the window to see if she is dead, and then when he sees that she starts to move, she's like, oh shit. And then he's like, all right, and then he like turns around and goes back downstairs.
Meanwhile, back at Castle Jarvis, Tommy has pinned the artist's rendition of Jason from Rob's newspaper clippings up on his mirror and begun cutting his hair for some reason.
Yeah, he takes out a pair of scissors and he just starts chopping away. And like the image, like you said, the images that he has taped to the mirror are of the young, bald, deformed Jason, but it's not really clear what he's getting into right now. But meanwhile, downstairs, Trish is, kind of dazed, and she stumbles back into the house, and somehow Tommy hears her come in and calls her name, and like she's not making a ton of noise, but she's like, Trish, and then Trish kind of gets pissed off that Tommy hasn't left the house yet.
Yeah, her wail of anguish that Tommy is still there is great. Like that's good acting. I totally get her, her resigned desperation. Like, you were supposed to leave.
You dumb ass. What are you still doing here?
Yeah. And then just in a spectacularly creepy shot as she's grasping the fact that Tommy is still in the house, Jason slowly appears in the door behind her.
It slowly is putting it mildly. It's so nonchalant. He's just like, doo, 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 and he just like walks up behind her.
Yeah, it's almost as though he's manifesting from darkness or something. It's great, and she somehow senses his presence as he's reaching for her. She spins around and splits his hand down the middle with the machete.
Yeah, I've gotten a paper cut on the web between my fingers before, and it hurts like a motherfucker, so I cannot imagine what this must have felt like.
Yeah, it's like right through the webbing between his middle finger and his ring finger, and he even holds his hand up to kind of survey the damage, and you can see this split.
Yeah, it's almost like a Vulcan kind of hand symbol.
Yeah, it's almost like a neck pinch, and it's so gruesome. While this is going on, Tommy is upstairs and has finished cutting his hair and is now shaving his scalp.
It's pretty clear that he doesn't have a father figure in his life because his shaving technique is really haphazard. He's just kind of like slashing it around his hair.
Hacking
like,
at his own head,
settle
basically.
down.
Yeah, go with the grain, Tommy.
Yeah,
Jesus.
There's spots that he's missing, and it's really terrible.
While he's hacking at his scalp, Trish is hacking at Jason's chest with the machete, causing him even to grunt with pain, which we don't hear an awful lot of. We heard a little bit in part 2, but he's usually pretty silent. And her defensive onslaught is actually staggering him a little bit until Tommy comes down the stairs. Tommy's head is now nearly completely bald. There are a few tufts of wispy hair that remain. He's somehow darkened circles around his eyes. Looks very pasty and kind of moist. clearly he's intending to evoke the image of boyhood swamp creature Jason, inspired by the drawings in the newspaper.
But most importantly, Tommy finally got the haircut his mother wanted him to get when he was going into town to get the bypass patch cord.
I never thought of that. They totally set this up. That's brilliant. So clearly, Tommy is trying to distract Jason with his own image.
It's more than just his shaved head, too. He's wearing a skin-tight polo shirt and uncomfortably short shorts that just make this really disturbing.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit humorous because it's clear that Corey Feldman is wearing a bald cap. He was too valuable a screen presence at that point to truly shave his head. So you can kind of tell that his hair is now tucked into the popped collar of his polo shirt. It's a little bit awkward, but more importantly, I'm just not even really sure what this is supposed to accomplish.
Well, I think he's taken a page out of Ginny's book. Not that he knows Ginny, but it's the same premise where like Ginny's made a little bit more sense because she had a background in psychology and she kind of knew how to get in the head of someone like Jason. But Tommy's just a little kid, and he gets this idea from minutes of looking at an artist rendering of this young Jason, and he somehow concocts this plan where he's like, well, if I shave my head, then, but we don't know what, like, what's the next step? What's he trying to accomplish with this?
And that's what I mean. Like, this feels like a pale imitation of Ginny's plan that was thought through, made logical sense, and had a definite end game in mind. Ginny would distract Jason with the image of his mother long enough for her to take a whack at him with the machete. This is Tommy, 10, 20 feet away, trying to confuse Jason. Like, is Jason supposed to think that he's seeing a kid who looks like he did? Is Jason supposed to think he's seeing some sort of hallucination of himself?
Well, that's the way Tommy's kind of presenting it, because Jason, big dummy that he is having the same reaction that he did when he saw Jimmy, and he's kind of like, or Ginny, and he's like, what? He just doesn't really know
puzzled,
what's going on.
He's confused.
So he starts to slowly walk toward Tommy, but then Tommy starts to kind of ad-lib here, and he's like, don't you remember, Jason? It's me. Which, again, doesn't make any sense, because, like, what do you mean it's me? It's you. Like,
right.
And so I don't know what the end game is here. Why would Jason necessarily believe that he's looking at himself? Like, if he's looking at his mother, I get it. It makes sense.
Right. Plus, because he was hoping for her resurrection.
Yeah.
This is probably the one element that keeps this movie from being my favorite. Otherwise, this is neck and neck with part two. It's top-notch Jason. He's in the hockey mask. The kills are great. The characters are amusing. But this is the scene that keeps it from being a cohesive movie with a definite plan. And it's too bad, because I like Tommy. I think it's cool that they introduced a younger kid, a kid who is probably the same age as people who are watching, a lot of people who are watching this movie. That adds an interesting level of danger to the proceedings to have a kid in jeopardy. But this climax just is so garbled and makes so little sense that it undermines the entire ending for me.
But whatever Tommy's desired effect is, I guess he achieves it, because while Jason's confused by what he is seeing, Trish sneaks up behind him with the machete. But before she can even land a hit, Jason turns around. So it's like, okay, fine. Tommy had this plan. It distracted Jason long enough for Trish to step in. But there's no way Tommy could have known all this was going to happen when he was shaving his head 10 minutes ago.
Right. He had no idea Trish was going to be there or even still alive. Okay, fair enough. It works. Trish takes a pretty poor swing at Jason with the machete, and all it manages to do is knock off his hockey mask. So we get to see Jason underneath, and he's looking pretty rough.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent with what we saw in the previous film for once. Usually as you go from movie to movie, the appearance of Jason changes drastically, but it's a little bit different than what we saw in the last movie because now there's a huge gash in his forehead where Chris landed the axe shot, a day or two earlier at the end of part 3. But yeah, he's pretty gruesome looking.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely closer to part 3 than part 3 was to part 2. It sounds like Tom Savini, having designed the makeup effects for young Jason, basically took those designs and then tried to age them up, which makes total sense. So Jason looks a little bit waxy. Some of his deformity is perhaps a little too static and looks masky to me, but overall it's pretty good. And yeah, he's nice and bloody from his injuries.
Trish is understandably pretty horrified by what she sees, and she starts to slowly stumble away from Jason as he's walking toward her. And Tommy sees the machete on the ground and decides to pick it up. Except Jason hears Tommy behind him, turns around, and gets the machete lodged in his head right above his ear through his left eye.
Yeah, it's a great shot. And the angle at which the machete has been buried in his face, it kind of silhouettes Jason's whole head in a way that makes me notice that he's got lower teeth that jut out of his jaw, almost like tusks. I mean, he's just a mess of a dude. So I kind of get why he'd walk around with a hockey mask on.
But if getting the machete, lodged through your left eye wasn't enough, Jason falls to the ground face first, driving the machete even further into his eye and through the back of his skull. And it remains one of the most revolting things I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, and there's even a little bit of shearing off the whole top dome of his skull, so you even see a little hint of brain as he's sliding down the blade of the machete.
And like the expression on his face is changing as he's slowly sliding down the machete. Like it's almost like he's wincing in pain, and it's just so disgusting.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. It's pretty great. Savini top notch work here. So it seems like Jason has been dealt with, and Trish and Tommy immediately embrace in relief, making sure that each other are okay and just breathing a sigh of relief. But Tommy notices that behind them, Jason's hand on the floor is still twitching a little bit, so he's not fully dead. And this leads Tommy to go absolutely apeshit.
He just starts chopping away at Jason, and he has this real psychotic look on his face, and the whole time he's doing this, he's just screaming, "Die! Die! Die!" over and over again.
And we hear Trish in the background screaming, "Tommy!"
Yeah, and she's, can't believe what's happening, and it's definitely overkill, but Tommy has snapped.
Yeah, he's in full berserker mode, just going to town, to the point where they even blast fade out on these shots of Tommy just hacking Jason.
Yeah, you don't even get to
pieces.
see like him come to an end. He just continues to hack away as the screen goes white.
So we have the end of Jason Voorhees. Jason was played in this movie by a guy named Ted White, who I was pleased to learn played Grogan, the bad guy at the very beginning of Romancing the Stone. He's sort of the evil cowboy in the fictional story that Joan Wilder is narrating at the beginning of that movie. He had a pretty long career. He doubled stunts for guys as prominent as John Wayne, in fact. So he's been around. He was uncomfortable with playing Jason, so he actually requested that his name be removed from the credits. But later on, seemed to embrace it enough. He appeared in the Crystal Lake documentary and spoke enough about the movie to reveal that he's apparently not a very big fan of Corey Feldman. They didn't seem to get along too well.
Yeah, he called him the meanest goddamn little kid he'd ever dealt with. So it's pretty blunt.
After the blast fade, we have a few minutes of garbage time at the hospital where doctors are assuring Trish that Tommy is normal. Not based on how creepy he's acting. He's not. He comes into Trish's hospital room. He's kind of backlit in the doorway. He's still bald, obviously, and just kind of standing there staring at her.
Thankfully, he's no longer wearing the skin-tight polo shirt and the too short shorts, but yeah, the bald head is still pretty damn creepy. He gives his sister a hug, and after a few seconds, Tommy's kind of sweet and relieved face looks directly into the camera and flashes us a menacing kind of, "I'm not going to be okay" look. And then we cut to the credits.
Yeah, that's where the movie ends. So Jason is dead, but now they seem to be setting Tommy up as a possible threat.
I'm just wondering if we even needed this hospital scene. Like the part where Tommy is just mindlessly hacking away at Jason is pretty disturbing in itself and implies that this kid is snapped and that he's gone to a different place and he's probably not going to recover from this. And then to show him, maybe a few hours later in the hospital with this creepy look on his face, like we wouldn't expect him to be better by then anyway. If it was maybe 1 year later or some like significant amount of time, then it would make sense to see that he was still damaged by this, but it's hours later and we don't expect him to be recovered.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're getting at, and I agree with you, although I'm playing it through in my head, and I feel like if the movie ended with Tommy hacking Jason to pieces, that's ending on climax. It's not ending on denouement. And this is a rather weak epilogue, but I feel like it's just a little bit of a breather that, they managed to get to safety. Presumably Jason is absolutely dead at this point, but keeping Tommy's insanity on the back burner at least. I get what they're going for. I see your point too. It could go either way for me. At this point, the end credits for the movie begin. I found it interesting that Steve Dash got a special appearance credit for appearing as Jason in the flashbacks, not Warrington Gillette. So that kind of indicates that Steve Dash did play Jason with the sack on his head running around. One other credit that jumped out at me was that one of the special makeup effects artists was Alec Gillis, who, along with Tom Woodruff, has gone on to do most of the effects for the Alien movies. I think he may have even worked on a couple of the Predator flicks. But yeah, he's been around and he pops up on a lot of DVD bonus features. I found it kind of humorous that the cast is actually credited alphabetically in these closing credits. So there's no hierarchy in terms of importance of character. But there are two people that we haven't covered yet. One is Joan Freeman. Joan was a child actor all the way back to the 1950s and began working in films in the early 1960s with some Elvis Presley movies. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, was her final film role, and her last acting role was on an episode of the TV show Renegade with Lorenzo Lamas. Apparently, she is an avid sailor. At one point, she and her husband lived on a yacht cruising up and down the east coast of the United States. Trish Jarvis was played by Kimberly Beck, who, most importantly for me, appeared on 2 episodes of The Brady Bunch. She was part of the social committee that worked with Marcia to bring Davy Jones to the prom, and then appeared a couple of seasons later when Marcia got a job at an ice cream shop and was unable to spend a lot of time with her boyfriend. He brought Kimberly Beck into the ice cream shop to make Marcia jealous. And Kimberly Beck wound up getting sprayed with whipped cream by Maureen McCormick. She recorded a hit single with her stepfather in Australia back in 1986. Shortly after that, she then returned to the U.S., where she picked up acting, and that's what led her to Brady Bunch and Friday the 13th. She also apparently shows up as a housewife in Independence Day, which
I saw that too. And, I can't say I was looking for her when we watched it, 2 or 3 years ago. But now next time I watch it, I'm going to have to look out for her.
Yeah, the only place I can think there's even a housewife is when Will Smith wakes up and goes outside to get the paper.
That's
or something.
Exactly what I was thinking when he walks out and everyone's kind of standing in the street, either packing up their cars to leave or freaking out and looking at the spaceship in the air. Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah. in her personal life, she apparently spent a few years married to William Barron Hilton Jr., who is the grandson of the hotel magnate. So in some tangential way, she's related to Paris Hilton. There's basically 16 seconds of blank screen after this segment, so I say we end it here and call this the end of Friday the 13th, the final chapter.
Sounds like a plan. Can't believe this is the final chapter. This is it.
I know.
The end of Jason.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss that guy.
I am too. He was cool.
Well, we're going to come back next week with a bonus episode to kind of wrap up this whole movie. But until then, I am Brian.
I'm Greg.
And you're all doomed.
One final time.